You have 3 seconds. Hi, good evening. It is 6 p.m., May 8th, 2012. This meeting of Yountville Zoning and Design Review Board is called to order. I will note that all members are present and ask for unanimous consent to adopt the agenda as presented. Hearing no objection, it is adopted. We will move to approving the minutes from April 10th. Are there any corrections or revisions?
None.
Okay. Noting that not all members were present for that meeting, I'm going to conduct a roll call vote to approve the minutes. Mr. Winterberg?
Yes.
Mr. Anglin?
Yes.
Mr. Durham?
Yes.
Mr. Gates? Yes. And
Member James?
I will abstain because I wasn't at the meeting and don't think I should comment on it.
And you weren't here, were you?
I wasn't here either. So there we go. I think you just
I
threw.
rolled
I
under
just
three.
think he threw that out there for me.
I knew there were
That's
only
fine.
3 of us.
Very good.
I got the roll call.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm here though.
Today.
Anybody here who wants to talk about something not on the agenda tonight? Bueller? Okay. Hearing no one, will skip over public comment and the vacant consent agenda and proceed directly to a sign permit for 6770 Washington Street. Sandra, pray go ahead with the staff report.
This is a sign permit for 2 new business identification signs at Chichio. One will be a wall-mounted sign on the west elevation, and this is the primary sign. It's an approximately 12-square-foot sign. The other is a wall-mounted sign on the north elevation at the entrance to the driveway, and this is an approximately 4-square-foot sign. All signs are enamel and will feature black and red copy with black accents on a white background, and the one on the front will have a red racer stripe that's offset to the right. These are pretty straightforward. They meet the sign ordinance requirements for sign area, number, and the design elements that are called out in the staff report, so we are recommending approval.
Thanks, Sandra. Any questions of staff? Frank, would you care to add anything?
Not really, just for questions, if there's anything pretty straightforward.
Anybody have questions of Mr. Altamira?
I guess I have one question for you, Frank.
Sure.
I know we're going to have some confusion with the whole market thing, and we've been there. You didn't put restaurant on any of your signs, and you're not required to, but
No.
did you consider that at all?
No, I didn't want to. I was trying to keep the building as clean as possible and just clean lines and things like that, so.
And the other question is that Ducati red, or what color red is
It's
that?
actually, it's a real deep orange,
Okay.
actually, so.
Okay.
Thanks, Frank. Any discussion?
No, I think it's pretty cool.
Please go ahead.
I would move to pass the sign proposal as presented.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Good night.
See you at the opening. When are you going to open? When are you going to open?
2012.
Uh-huh. Good answer.
I like that. Thanks, covered all your bases there, just like the no restaurant on the.
Next item on the agenda, 7.2, design review for 2006 Weber Avenue.
And Mr. Chair, I'll recuse myself given my proximity to the address.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I should note before we go on, we've found 2 email communications, no, 1 email, 1 fax, both supporting the application, one from Nina Klotz and the other from Gabriel and Charlene Silva. Thanks, Sandra.
All right. This is design review for an addition to a single-family residence, and this parcel was created in 2008 when a 2-parcel division was created with the property to the east at the corner of Yount and Weber. When the parcel was created, conditions attached to the project, and those are attached to the staff report. It's the first attachment. The proposal is to add a 488 square foot addition to the rear north elevation of this residence, shown on this drawing. And the existing residence is an approximately 817 square foot structure. The setbacks and height of the addition all conform to the requirements for the Old Town Historic Zoning District. And the materials and colors will match the existing stucco, the asphalt roofing, the wood window and door trim, and the metal-clad multi-paned windows. So it is in conformance with the design standards. Staff has just raised some of the issues with this project in the staff report, and I'll go through those one by one. One relates to parking, and when the property received approval of the parcel map in 08, a second parking stall was shown on those drawings, and it's shown here on the site plan to basically at the southeast corner of the carport, but that stall was never constructed, and so we're recommending and conditioning that it be finalized with this addition. It will require removal of some of the rose garden and the relocation of those rose bushes, and then the extension of the driveway. And this is so the parking space can be independently accessible, and it'll avoid a tandem parking situation. Tandem parking can only be approved when there's really no other viable alternative, and there is in this case. So it's a requirement that they comply with the parcel map, and then the added burden because they of the addition here, it would trigger it if the parcel map hadn't already. The next issue in the staff report is regarding the front porch, and the applicant is not proposing a front porch, and staff notes that front porches are common in the Old Town Historic District, but they're not a strict requirement. The addition is generally an incentive to the FAR to encourage the use of a front porch, and so this remodel doesn't trigger that. Although there are certain architectural elements for the front elevation that are required, and there's a list of 4 of those in the design ordinance, and they're called out in the staff report. And one of those is an exterior stair with closed riser, which we're saying is met in this instance because of the small stoop or porch in this case. Granted, that doesn't have the same impact as a porch, but we don't feel one's required because of this remodel. And we note that the applicant has indicated they would like to do a front porch, and they'll probably be back in the future to do so. The addition is in the location of the mulberry tree that you can see over the roof line here in the backyard, and the applicant is requesting its removal. It's shown here, and in the top photo you can see the location of the existing shed that will be relocated, and it's approximately the same distance to the structure. Its removal is being requested because of the root system in the close proximity to the foundation, and this is really one of the criteria for removal of a tree where it will interfere with a new addition. And so we are recommending that it be removed. The applicant is proposing to plant 2 or 3 fruit or olive trees in the backyard, and we're not conditioning that those be planted. And note that there is really significant, there are significant existing trees along the property boundaries. There are 2 redwoods and a lot of other tall green trees. The last item is the undergrounding of the utilities, and I mentioned that that was a condition of approval of the parcel map, and it shows the pole in this photo. Generally at the, it's just a little offset from the southwest corner of property corner, and so we are requiring that undergrounding be completed as part of this project. We are recommending approval subject to the conditions in the staff report, and if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them.
It was always really well done, thank you. Questions for staff?
I have a question about the parking space that when the lot was subdivided. So it's the parking space to the right, not the one that's behind the car in
Correct.
the carport?
And this photo shows the location.
Right.
It's between that live oak at the street and really the carport there that will provide enough room to.
And they're required to have one covered, one uncovered parking space, and it can be parked, and that space can be in the front yard like that, close to the property line. Okay.
It can be on a driveway, it can be within the setback.
Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else with questions for staff at this time? We'd love to hear from the applicant. If you care to have anything to say? Hi.
My name is James. I'm the designer.
Hi, James.
And this is Chris, the homeowner. We did try to see if there was a way to get a variance or maybe a lien extension for the grounding and the utilities, if that was a possibility. The budget for that is significant. It's the amount that a front porch would be. Didn't know if that was any negotiation. I don't think so. Sandra's been doing a real thorough job working with us and doing everything. I can't believe how much you had to write up. That was a pretty good job. Didn't know if there was any kind of leeway we could be granted there or not, or if it was even open for discussion.
I'm sure we'll have a discussion amongst ourselves about that
Okay.
question, but thank you for emphasizing your concern.
Actually, I love having. Sorry.
Thank you.
We would love to have a porch. Trust me, that's why we originally were thinking about it, because everybody has a porch down the street. But the stuff from when the property was split, unfortunately, was never disclosed when I bought the house. So we found that out literally about a week ago, that those, or 2 weeks ago, that we had to get those things done. So it kind of took away from the budget from the porch. So that's kind of our problem.
Have you guys done an estimate on what undergrounding would cost?
Yeah,
for
you know,
this property?
the contractor, well, he called the PG&E, and apparently PG&E's very sneaky about ever giving you an estimate, and
They won't.
Todd Hardy, the contractor, said he can do the bearing part for about $1,500 to $2,000. PG&E says it could go from $10,000 up to $20,000 just to do whatever they have to do on the post. And of course, I asked them, well, what are you doing on the post that costs so much? And they won't give me an answer. And they said they won't do it until I pay them for the engineering, which is about $2,000 to $3,000. So, and the two different porches that we looked at, one was an offset like the one across the street, and the other one was a little bit more formal. And both of those came under that price by a lot. You know what I mean? To be able to put the porch up, it's just having that underground utility thing has kind of set us back a little bit. So.
Well, I think we'll talk about this a lot. I do have a question for you, and I don't want to present this necessarily as an option, but would you be opposed to relocating your electric meter to near the very front corner? That'd be the southwest corner of your property on, say, a backboard that's about 3 feet tall.
Well, what's interesting, you know, that the structure next door is that Lavender Inn. It's the barn. So there's no neighbor there. So literally, it wouldn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to us at all. You know what I mean? I don't know from the perspective of the.
I understand. It's on the
I
left
w-
side wall of the house.
I'm asking you if you would mind having an overhead service drop to a remote meter located on a backboard at the southwest corner of the property, and from there, underground to the house.
That could definitely help out.
So is that a yes, that would be an option you would consider?
Yeah, I think we actually have some long grasses back there. You could actually hide it behind the grasses even. I mean, it would actually be cosmetically, you probably wouldn't even notice it was there. If you look at, I mean, you can't see them very well, but there's some real tall grasses on this side.
That's going overground, right, to our pole?
Overhead.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there's a tree and then there's grasses and then behind it is the barn. So it literally could hide back there. I don't know how big something like that is, structurally.
Not very.
We're open to anything, you know what I mean? So.
That's my only question of the applicant.
Yeah, that'd be extremely helpful if you guys were willing to consider that.
Anyone else with questions of the applicant?
If I could respond to one of the applicant's
Please do.
concerns. They had asked for a variance to not do the undergrounding altogether, but also asked for some leniency as to the timing of the completion of the project. And the town manager was out on Friday, the day we submitted the staff report. But today he indicated there would be some flexibility not to complete it at time of final inspection, as long as diligent efforts were being made toward completing the work and knowing how long PG&E takes to work with. Since it is a condition of the parcel map to be undergrounded, we'd have to really check with the Director of Public Works about this board you're talking about, but we could perhaps build that in as an option.
I'm just exploring.
So-
options at that point. And Mr. Rogers' discussion of the potentiality for flexibility and timing, did he discuss bonding? What leverage would the town have besides goodwill, which is important, but nevertheless, what leverage would the town have beside goodwill after a C of O had been granted on the remodel?
Possibly a certificate of occupancy.
Well, my question to staff
Not
was,
much, so a bond.
what leverage would the town have other than goodwill
Yeah.
after a certificate, a C of O, certificate of occupancy had been granted?
Oh, I think you can hold that back perhaps.
My question doesn't make sense if I say after a certificate of occupancy. You can't, you're not going to get a final inspection.
We talked about giving a temporary. In the meantime, he mentioned a bond, but I don't think we favor that approach. We'd like them to complete the work, so a temporary followed by a final would be.
With an MOU of some sort of written instrument? Okay. Thank you.
I have another question of staff. So could you speak to the reason for undergrounding? And, I mean, it's a town-wide effort. It's not particular to this pole. And so could you speak a little bit about that?
It's a standard condition that they want properties undergrounded, at least stubbed out to run to the pole.
So is the goal to get rid of the poles?
Eventually, yeah, if they come through and later and underground the street, then they're prepared to.
So what is the timing on undergrounding that
There is
street?
none.
There's
It's
none.
just as the opportunity presents itself.
Right, right.
And
But
both
that
the
is the goal, so essentially it's to get all the poles out of town and underground all the utilities.
Is
It's to
it
get
not
rid of the
also
service
true
drop.
that, and I'm going to attempt to add an answer, is it also, not also true that by getting all of these overhead service drops off of private property, it makes the ultimate undergrounding that much easier? If PG&E and AT&T
Yeah, naturally.
and Comcast are coming down the street trying to underground, they're not trying to cross people's property outside of the franchise area.
So it's underground to the property line, and then essentially that, at some point, all those connections are made in the street.
And again, let's see if we have any further questions of the applicant, and then we'll probably discuss internally. I think that may be something we talk about, Rob, that the town's requirement to underground the utilities is perhaps vague in the sense it doesn't recognize the variety of means that, how that would be achieved. One person might have to cross the street and go 100 feet down the street to get to the nearest point of connection to underground service utilities. Another person, and we don't know if this pole is so busy or not, may only have to go 40 feet from his own house. I think that's maybe a broader policy discussion, but it is something to highlight.
Where
But
is your meter? Is
The
it,
condition, if it's, go ahead.
Oh, it's at the southwest corner of the house. It's around the corner there and back about 5 feet.
southwest, okay.
I think about 5 feet.
Yeah, it's about 5 feet from the
Okay,
corner of the-
yeah, thanks. No, I hear you.
Well, thanks very much. If we have follow-up questions, yeah, go right ahead.
One more question.
Yes.
Is it possible to approve my client to continue to begin construction at this time, or would this have to be tabled until another month before he could start doing his project? If we're asking for too much.
We
I
saw
don't
you
know
had
that-
your portable toilet out there already.
That's a great question, and I think to answer it, we need to kind of move our discussion along and
Okay.
decide what resolution we're going to try to adopt. What I can say without question is, as I'm sure you know, you need the design review approval to apply for the building permit, and then you can go to town. How the other conditions of the building permit are attached, I don't know the answer yet.
Okay, that's what we're trying to do, is if we don't have to delay another month, that'd just
Yeah.
be so helpful for us. So we can do it.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, my wife's in culinary school at CA, and that's where she lives. And so I live in Reno. And so she's actually there doing her externship, and we're hoping to get the project done before she has to return to school. Otherwise, she has no place to live. So that's, I guess, a little bit of a urgency. But
Well, I'm sure we'll do our best to get you some kind of clear direction tonight.
great.
I had two questions.
Oh, yeah.
One is on the elevation, east elevation of the bedroom. on your plans, it shows 2 windows there, but then on your elevations, it shows 1 large window.
I have a corrected elevation if you would like it with me.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to say there's a discrepancy. And the other thing is, I noticed you only have 1 window in your bedroom, and it's really nice to have light from several different directions. And I wondered if you've thought about that, or what's your kind of thought on that?
We did. We were trying to maintain privacy to the church there in the back in the commercial on the left-hand side. And so it was for privacy. We've gone back and forth about the windows on the north wall.
It seems like the inn that's next door, that's just a storage building, isn't it? There's no habitable space?
No, actually, there's the part where the house is or where the addition is parking lot to the Lavender Inn.
Oh, it
So the barn
is.
is
So
in front, and
the
then-
barn's in the front, yeah.
So that's the reason, is people driving in at night, kind of light up the.
You know, but one thing that you might think about is on the wall, the north wall, where you have the bed, to have 2 smaller windows, square windows or something like that, with like rice paper glass in there or something like that. So you get the light, but you have the privacy too. Anyway, I mean, it really transforms the space when you get light coming in from several
Oh, yeah, I
different
agree.
exposures. So anyway,
I also got the braced wall panels right there, and they can't go over 10 foot tall. So I'm tucking them in the corners, so the only thing left in would be the center. We still meet all the energy requirements, though, so we could have space for that.
sure. Anyway, it's just an idea. I just noticed
Oh,
that.
yeah. Anything else?
Thanks very much.
We thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
So before we get into a discussion, I think the biggest topic of discussion is utility undergrounding. So, well, I might have some very strong opinions, and I do, about utility undergrounding. It's not clear to me at all that it's within our purview to alter a land use entitlement condition of approval. It's not design review. It's not even a question of zoning as in the proper use of the property. Is it in fact a restaurant where a restaurant is the zoned use? I look at this as something I happen to be strongly in favor of utility undergrounding and think it should be encouraged and be the first thing that's done. But I don't know that my opinion's salient. I think what I'm looking for is, do we even have the authority to take a different decision than a condition imposed at the council level?
I think we have the authority to suggest a solution to getting it done and a timing change to get it done, but in the end, it gets done. I don't think you're in a position to waive it, or, it's a
And-
condition of the parcel map.
Right, and that's what I'm driving
The parcel map was
at.
approved by the council.
Right.
And to unwind that one, it's a trip to the council to.
And hence my question. I thought so. Is it procedurally acceptable, and again, I'm trying to anticipate the direction I think the board might go, to break any action we take tonight into 2 separate approvals, sort of act on design review and separately, perhaps, whether it's make a recommendation or propose an alternate means of satisfying a condition? And my thought there is so that the 2 actions aren't tied together. Both could proceed, and if there's further discussion on another, it can be handled separately without jeopardizing the entire approval. Is that procedurally acceptable to staff?
I would, s-
It's proper.
really?
I like
Well,
Bob's
I
answer.
would say,
They're not waiving the condition.
I would say the way this is worded, that it's imposed on the following development request, and this is the development request in front of you, although I suppose we could say that's the building permit, if you wanted to separate them out.
Okay. So-
I think it's this entitlement that triggers that requirement, so they're tied together.
And the entitlements from the lot split.
I think you could modify the condition to build in some flexibility, if that would ultimately be approved by the Director of Public Works, because it's his final.
He's saying make
say.
recommendations for.
And
he's
can't
not-
we include those recommendations in the
As a-
condition?
As a separate action, actually.
Okay.
But then
I don't want to try to reinterpret the council's condition, but I'm suggesting we might, as a separate action, recommend to, for example, the Public Works Director that he consider this as an alternate means of satisfying the condition. If he, for example, said no, it wouldn't void the action we took on the design.
Yeah, and frankly,
Okay.
I have doubts whether the Public Works Director would consent to the solution you were discussing of putting it on a
Yeah, I don't think so.
panel at the corner there.
Okay.
So what we're talking about is the building permit is all tied into this approval of this entitlement that goes along with the property.
Still going to be a requirement when they leave here. They'll have design review action, whatever you do on that. But the undergrounding will still be a requirement with some recommendation that you are directing to the attention of the Public Works Director, I suppose, or for timing or bonding or some other solution to handling the underground.
Okay.
Any comments on the design? Should we switch to the easy part?
Good, really.
No, I think it's very appropriate and fits right in, so.
I concur with that. What I'll say is, I said earlier, I have very strong feelings about the utility undergrounding. I think it should be encouraged as much as possible. I think it was an absolutely proper condition to impose. You have my great sympathy that it was not disclosed to you, and I think you could have a very interesting conversation with the people who didn't disclose that information to you. The property should have been valued to reflect that, and you do have my sympathy. Nonetheless, referencing what I said earlier, even if I agreed that it would be okay to waive it, which I don't, I want to be frank, I don't think we have the authority. I think that's clear to us to unwind that condition. With that said, I do recognize that, in my view, the town's utility conditions don't recognize the differences between properties and how different it can be. We could sit here today and find out that that pole is not at all suitable for a secondary downriser and that it needs to be replaced entirely, which involves restringing the overhead wires from Jefferson to Yount. We truly don't know. Or it could be as simple as trenching over to the pole. We just don't know. And I don't know that it's ever been the intent of the policy to so wildly treat properties differently. So for my part, I would be willing to recommend to the Public Works Director that he consider, if the board concurred that this satisfied the intent of the condition, that he consider a remote backboard mounted meter within, say, 5 feet of the front property line. And by remote, I mean not attached to the house. And I think, in my view, that would achieve the intent of reducing the amount of overhead wires and facilitating the subsequent undergrounding of the transmission and distribution wires. Because this project isn't going to remove all the overhead wires running up above the street. It's just going to remove the drop wires.
So this would be the main panel, is what you're saying. You moved the main panel to the street.
Yes.
And the opinion would be that when they come along and do pull out the poles and everything, that then they wouldn't have to go across the private property and deal with the house. It would already have been pushed out to the property line.
Exactly. It would be 2 or 3 feet, and if PG&E were on top of their game, they would ask to be granted a 5-foot by 5-foot easement where this meter is located at the front of the property. They would extend their franchise strip, which might already run 10 feet. The front 10 feet of the property might be part of a PG&E easement already. We don't know.
So you're talking about a permanent solution. Essentially, this board with your main service stays there forever, right?
Or when the property gets redeveloped and someone needs more power and the...
I mean, I know we're trying to help, but I wouldn't stand behind that solution. I just think a panel with a meter is not something that's appropriate for a residential area in the front yard. So, are there other ways that we could address this? I mean, one is, well, essentially you're going to have to dig a trench. And then, you know, it's a couple $1,000s that you know of. And then there's the unknown of PG&E, the black hole.
I was going to mention that we have a local rep we deal with on PG&E, and we may be able to get better information. Work with you on that.
I mean, unfortunately, it laid out the way it did with the sale, the disclosure, but, I mean, my goal is just to get going, and if that has to be done, I'll take care of it. It's just that we were actually, like I said, hoping to do the front porch, and then that kind of changed on us just because of that.
Were you going to say something?
No. But if we're going to have more discussion, it should be at the mic.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's good.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we need a motion, yes? Or is this
Well,
just
I just like-
purely?
yeah, I just think that we don't want to set a precedent, unfortunately. I do think that the overall reasoning behind undergrounding is a good one, and it does really visually clean up the whole town. And so I wouldn't vote for an interim solution that becomes a permanent solution. And I would just hope that PG&E is in a good mood that day. I've had experience with them, so I know it's really a crapshoot.
And so then the discussion becomes timing.
Oh, one last thing, and the parking space, there's not any request for a variance on that, is that correct?
No.
This one letter said something about allowing the tandem parking.
Yeah, I noticed that. But
that's
the
not even
applicant's
on the table.
materials aren't requesting that. It's the applicant's drawing that shows the second parking space.
Okay.
Mr. Gates? Anything you wish to add?
No. I think that I've been through this before with the San Francisco property with going underground with PG&E, and unless you have PG&E as a signed-on partner, we can insist upon these kinds of requirements till we're blue in the face, but if they don't want to put the stuff underground, they don't have to do it, and they won't do it. I understand the idea, and I'm fully supportive of it, but it'd be nice if there was a PG&E guy here to talk about it and who signs off on what's right and what complies, and is it PG&E that signs off? Is it our guy at DPW that signs off? Who approves everything? Who says this is up to snuff? Power
Both
on.
necessary to achieve the undergrounding.
Correct. And I don't see that spelled out here, but quite frankly, when we did it in San Francisco, it took us 20 years. 20 years, but we did it.
My goodness.
And was that at the discretion of PG&E?
Of course.
Or, I mean, the people on your street had no...
Well, we had some
kind of-
persistent neighborhood coalition that,
And here in our town is, how do streets get undergrounded?
Well, if we're doing the streets, PG&E definitely has to be involved.
No, I understand, but then everybody would have to be on board on that street before PG&E would come in, or before you would initiate the
Or the
work?
town would initiate the undergrounding. We just completed that on North Washington.
So then people that aren't undergrounded would, how's that handled?
They can refuse access to their property, in which case there would be a pole just offside their property. The power would come underground, rise up the pole, and serve a person's
There'd be a
property.
drop that way.
Which
Nice.
is, and I understand your objection to my proposal, but what it removes, so to speak, is really the option of someone saying, I'm not going to let you dig up my yard to convert my existing overhead power to underground, because the point of connection is there. And I think probably what Member Gates experienced, a project like this is 100% applicant funded. When PG&E is collecting from all of us on our Blue Stripe bills money that goes into its utility underground fund, they kind of get to decide when they do it. The town, in this case, may add funding and affect the schedule. But a project that's 100% applicant funded, such as this one, while I would never call PG&E fast, it's certainly faster because they get to bill for everything, as opposed to it's just on their regular undergrounding program, which, in any event.
Yeah.
See, we're all in agreement on the design.
And we haven't talked about the tree, but I'm fine with the tree thing, too.
I'm glad you raised that. My final note was I would like the conditions to reflect the applicant as I understood it from you, and I'll ask you to come to the mic if I'm mistaken. I would like a condition to be added that 2 trees be replanted to replace some mulberry. However, recognizing its species and location, I think the replacement trees could be as small as 15-gallon.
Didn't they say 3? Wasn't that in your report?
I heard 2 to 3, and I'm proposing as a minimum
Just make
condition
it 3.
a 2-to-1 replacement.
Okay.
Yeah, we were contemplating doing 2 or 3 trees ourselves, so 2 would be perfect at 15-gallon. That was what my client wanted to do anyway.
That would be a condition I would like to see added to whatever action we take.
Okay.
And as far as species and location, I'm happy that staff say yes, confirm that it's acceptable.
I'm fine with that.
I think it's good.
What would anyone care to try to craft a motion that'll get?
I don't know if I've got everything. Well, you're against the front yard option.
Yeah,
actually
I don't
have
want to set a
admit,
precedent.
I'm kind of against that option as well, just from an aesthetic perspective.
Then I will propose a motion
Okay.
that we approve this project as presented with an added condition that the mulberry tree removal, there be 2 minimum 15-gallon replacement trees, subject to species and location, subject to staff approval during building permit phase.
I'd second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Best wishes.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. Sandra, also, thank you so much for your help and being so thorough. Good job.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, it is really quite unfair. But I think the goal is good, it's just the means to the end is the rocky part.
Mr. Durham? A sign ordinance update workshop.
Well, as you know, we've been running into some issues with the sign ordinance as we interpret sections and apply others, and so we thought it would be a good idea to hold a workshop first at the CDRB, then to take your comments to the town council and hopefully update this ordinance. What we're hoping to do is go one by one through the sections identified in the staff report and work through each one before moving to the next and get some suggestions on how to proceed. So anyway, I'll turn it over to Bob to do the first one.
Well, the first one is probably the most difficult.
I think that's why she turned it over to you.
I know. This had to do with the ongoing, how we measure the sign area. And the report starts off with the definition of display surface for a sign. And it's the area of a sign without a border placed on the wall of a building shall be computed by enclosing the entire sign within sets of parallel lines touching the outer limits of the sign message and computing the area enclosed. The areas of signs shall be calculated by adding the outer dimensions of all faces capable of presenting a sign message, excluding the standard and frame. And what the issue has been on this before is a couple of instances. The Bardesano sign was a big discussion on around this topic, where they had those rammed earth walls at the entry off of Yount, and they eventually put signage on them, or came to you to put signage on, and it became a question of what is the sign area to be measured, how much of that wall or the entire wall to be measured in calculation towards their sign limitation. I think what we're suggesting here is when it's a monument sign or it's a structure that's a standard that's clearly intended to contain the sign, and that's its sole purpose. And the example being used here is Hotel Yountville, the monument sign. That's the only reason it's there. As opposed to structures that have signs on them that serve other purposes. Arguably, the Bardesano walls served another purpose at one point in time. The history of that project was that they were, and you've probably heard this from me, but the original design called for more extensive use of rammed earth walls throughout the project, and they were to denote entry points at not only to the entire project from the street as you drove in, but at each of the, there are 5 building clusters there that contain the guest units. And they are separate one to the other and have distinct landscaping one to the other. And at the entry to each of those is going to be this large rammed earth abrasive walls that you would pass through to go into the landscape area. And there was also, the only place they ended up not getting eliminated for cost reasons were at the entry off of Yon and in the motor court at reception. There's 4 of them, I believe, there. The ones at the building clusters were eliminated as the project progressed because they were too expensive. So that was the original purpose of that. They were not going to contain any text, they were just going to be this thing that was interesting in appearance and denote entry. The Napa Valley Lodge, more recently, when they're in their remodel, they have a curved wall at the front. That's going to be a new feature of that, improvements that they're putting out by the statue there at the entry. They're affixing their sign to that curved wall. Arguably, that curved wall it's a retaining wall for the landscaping bed beyond. It defines the edge of that property and creates this sort of face to the street entry statement. It would be there whether they had a sign on it or not. I think you could say the same thing about Bardesano walls. They were going to be there no matter. They got adapted to another purpose of holding signs. And that's maybe a distinction we ought to look at, is if it exists independent of, for another purpose, what the sign is mounted to. A couple of issues that I think ought to be considered when you are measuring these signs that are on walls is that I think the temptation would be to make a very thin presentation, borderless, minimal, because if you're counting what's beyond the actual copy of the sign, that's going to be maybe viewed as a penalty, particularly if they're short on their signage allotment. And they could bring it right to the edge, no border. Anything adding to the area is going to be seen as a detriment.
Bob, if you'll forgive the interruption, I'd like to, because I get confused easily, sort of stop with the monument sign discussion and see if we can give you our thoughts there and then handle each in turn. Does that make sense? Because the second point, if I'm following correctly, and again, I get easily confused, is more about once sort of sign area is defined, how do we measure it? Does it include the border? I'd like to respectfully suggest we try to tackle the question of a monument sign.
I see, in my mind, a relationship between what I just said and the size of the monument, so to speak. But yeah, I'll make that point maybe later.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm easily confused. I think I saw it more as a connection, and I'm not sure how we delineate them out. You want to discuss purely what's defined as a monument sign and what's not as monument sign?
Well, what I would give it as an example is we looked at and we talked a lot about the Hotel Yountville monument sign, because originally the entire monument was presented as a sign, as I recall. Then there was sort of the area within, right? And there could have been a border within that area that is or is not counted in sign area, or just the portions that say Hotel Yountville on that black background. So that's how I see them as separate discussions, is whether it's a monument, whether it's a landscape element that serves another purpose. if I'm the only one who thinks this way, I won't surely want to insist upon the point. But to me, if the sign has a border, if it doesn't, it is a separate question from, shall we be counting the entire monument?
Well, I'll give you my punchline and then I'll stop.
Lay it on me.
It has to do with the nature of the ordinance driving a certain design solution that inhibits, restricts creativity in some cases. And another example is asymmetrical signs. If you look at the Lucy sign, they took a big L and then they ran the text asymmetrically under it a little bit. It's not something you would put in a rectangle or a square. And I think if it's got to fit in a rectangle and that's what gets counted, they're getting penalized for taking a different solution. If you look at out of town, what I consider a kind of a handsome, unique sign, that's a big sign, it's at Napa Valley Community College, and they took letters and mounted them on a pedestal that were, I think they're metal letters, and then separate from that, detached, is a backdrop that you view the letter, it's a wall that you view the letters against. I don't know, it's maybe a foot or two behind. It's completely detached. I look at that's clever, but how would we start counting the backdrop wall and all the letters? And
Is it a natural extension of that thrust? Let's take the Hollywood sign, and if we were calculating its area, do we start ignoring the spaces between the letters? Because clearly that's...
Well, I'm just concerned we don't count the whole hill.
There's
nice
the
one,
punchline.
Bob. That was pretty solid.
So my concern is, and I guess maybe this is kind of part of the discussion here, is what I'm more concerned about than text is mass. So, and that's where one of my concerns about the Bartisono became, you can have little text this big, but I don't want these giant monuments everywhere. And if we're only counting the text, and this comes down to a question kind of further on here that I said in what was kind of suggested as options were, what if I want a wall? And I say, well, no, it's a sign, but I make it 10 feet wide and 6 feet tall, and I put a little sign on it. So is that a monument sign or is that a wall? And what are we counting it as? Are we counting it as a monument sign but only 2 square feet that has text on it? So take Bartisono. What if they'd wanted to take those walls and run them all the way across the front of their property and put a little text on it? What is that? Are we counting it as a wall? Are we counting it as a sign that has different limitations than a wall? What are we doing if we're just counting the text on a monument sign? Then a monument sign could get big.
I agree. One thing Director Tiernan touched on earlier was where if the sign medium, is serving some other clear purpose. You gave the example of Napa Valley Lodge, where it's a retaining wall. It's creating a planter bed. I would be supportive of something that said, if they're in the absence of a clearly discernible purpose for this medium, any area greater than twice the sign area counts as sign area. So, for example, a monument that was 8 square feet, if 4 square feet of it were signage, great, and there's another 4 square feet of it that's just structure, hey, knock yourself out. But if you want to make this wall 50 square feet and all it's supporting is 20 square feet of signage, and the wall's not serving any clearly discernible purpose, it's not a screening wall, it's not...
My question is, what happens if it becomes what appears to be a screening wall? Then are we counting its area for a wall or a sign?
wall, I think.
I think if it's a legal wall, it's a legal wall. I think if they build a wall...
I think our question becomes, and this is, I hate to be the person that keeps it, when is it a wall and when is it not a wall?
Well, I think a wall is defined by the design codes of where you can have a wall and the height of a wall. If you want to just build a wall that's freestanding in your front yard, it's got to be 3 feet. It can't be any higher than that. but you could build a wall. I mean,
So
why
what about
not?
the Bardessono walls?
Well,
Landscape, great. And I agree with Mr. Wennerberg there. Those were presented as landscape elements. Those were basically little decorative features because they look pretty, and they do, with their wavy rammed earth colors. They were never presented as this is a screening mechanism, it's to shield cars, it's for privacy, it's retaining earth. It was never presented as, this is a medium to hang a sign on. It's a piece of natural art.
Well, I think in the process, because that's a special zoning district, and they can build a wall in the front yard. It's as high as they want to, if it's approved by the council. Is that correct? And
Well, different standards apply because it's a master development plan, and that additionally is a PD zoned property.
right, but they could build a wall that was higher than 3 feet, say, in the front yard.
Because the normal standards don't really apply. It's
Right,
looked at
exactly.
on
But
a
it would have to
special
go through the
case-by-case.
process of review and discovery, essentially.
Exactly as happened at Bardessono.
Right. So, I mean, my feeling is that this definition, as I sort of get this, is it trying to address that. And if you put a sign up there, you're running these parallel lines around it, and that's your sign. So if it was passed to be a wall there for whatever reason that it was allowed to be, and then you go in and you put these identifications on there, then you have to have some kind of way to identify what is the sign, what is the wall. So running parallel lines makes sense to me, as it's defined here. I mean, that clearly would deal with that. Then like the monument at the Yountville Inn, you know, again, they could build that little wall in the front yard because it is allowed, but what I call the sign would be the intervention of, I mean, clearly what they put on there was an intervention. It's not stone. It has some frame that presents the sign. That would be the sign to me, because it's an intervention. It's a different material. It's a different kind of element on that wall. So that's how I would look at that. And I wouldn't look at the letters. I would look at the frame that holds the letters against the stone.
I believe we counted that whole structure.
See, yeah, but
Bardessono.
during that discussion,
Sorry,
At Hotel Yountville?
yeah, because they presented
Rather
that
than
to
just the
us.
cabinet. It was the whole monument structure.
We did because the original sign approval counted the entire structure. As I recall it, it was, here's how it was originally calculated in, that was in like 91. And I think we said, we're not going to reinterpret that original calculation because it was approved as part of the signage for the entire property. So we're going to stick with how it was originally calculated. That's how I recall that. But we did talk about, should it just be the
Right.
area capable of displaying signage?
Well, I remember that discussion, and I think my point was what I just said, that the frame is the sign. And actually, in that discussion, it allowed them to have a larger sign. If they were replacing the sign inside of that frame, it allowed them a bigger sign than if they tore down the monument and built their new sign in there. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was their original plan, and that's why they came back.
Yeah,
to the next
exactly.
meeting
And
amended it.
my point was, don't tear it down. I mean, you've got this sign there, and I think that we allowed them to put a new sign in there, which they ultimately did, in that existing monument, and didn't tear it down and do the sign that would be more restrictive in what the size would be.
Is there any quote-unquote right to signage location?
What do you mean by that?
So, in the case of Bardessono, if, getting back to, is it a wall or is it a sign medium? Could we have said, you know, love the sign, don't like the location, that you should not turn this structure? This wasn't necessarily what I concluded, but I'm making it by way of example. We just think that's a grossly inappropriate location for a sign. So the sign's great, find another location for it, but simply because this structure exists in this location doesn't axiomatically mean it's
Right.
it's an area okay for sign.
Kinda
That's
went
within
on
your
at Bardessono.
discretion.
So is that kind of a way that one could work around that issue of flagpoles, right? Flagpoles are allowed by right as long as they're not any taller than whatever the building height is. And somebody said, well, my flagpole is going to, I'm exaggerating for effect, is going to be 3 feet square masonry and 20 feet tall. And, well, gosh, a few years down the road, isn't this a great location to put a sign? I'm
There's, usually, though, the board defers to the applicant's requests for where they think it is a good location, but it not frequently, occasionally, turns out where it isn't, and it comes to the attention of the applicant later. Bardesano was one of them. They had that little monument down the driveway with little letters on it, and that was their sole identification sign. It said Bardesano Hotel Spa Restaurant or whatever. And it wasn't effective. Red is another example. They had a little sign in a shrubbery in the fence, that green screen. You couldn't see it at night ever, and most of the time not in the day. So they put another one up attached to the building. But in both of those cases, I think the reviewing body could have anticipated, well, maybe this isn't a good idea, but usually they let them go ahead and try it.
So how would you measure Lucy if you do your parallel?
I don't think it ought to be rectangles. I think it ought to be just parallel lines surrounding the copy.
if the sign,
I mean, you could call it, you could say 2 inches off of the copy all around, so that,
Or, yeah, whatever is a reasonable.
or flush
Order.
attached rectangles within which the letters, words, and/or logos can be contained. So in the case of Lucy, it would be 2 rectangles. That's the language you've proposed.
Maybe more, maybe
More,
one
yeah.
for the
The
L
L,
and one for
the
the rest of
Lucy.
Lucy and one for the copy underneath.
Because there's a big L.
Okay.
12 L's.
And I think we,
like that. Dude.
we didn't consider this sign when we drafted that, which is obviously a circle. So we don't have parallel lines, but obviously you take the
Change
area.
rectangular to, classic
Symmetric
Euclidean
shape.
Yeah.
shapes.
Well, I mean,
But
another way,
that's
if-
how we're going to measure
if we
that. We're
learned how
not
to
going
describe 'em
to
in
build a
10th
box around that circle.
well, another way to look at it would be to say that an offset of the edges of the sign, 2 inches or whatever beyond that, is the measurement of the sign, or however you want to do it. So that you take the geometry of the sign and give some dimension around that half-inch, whatever you want to call it, beyond that, that becomes the measuring device for that. So that, it works for a circle, it works for a Lucy, it works for everything like that.
So change the word rectangle to standard.
And are we talking about the
Metric shape.
identification name, or, and I'm thinking of a very unique sign, Grosinger, that has this kind of atomic orb with
Yeah.
electrons, and it's made out of metal, you can see through it, and I think the name is on there somewhere. How much of that do you measure? It's like all over the place, it doesn't have defined edges. Do you measure the,
I think rectilinear shapes is the way to go. Personally, I think it's pretty easy, and I would do the same with this.
I'd really like if we could get Euclidean, though, in our ordinance somewhere. Could we do that?
Thank you. I'm glad.
To have Euclid do our calculations, another consultant.
We've got A equals pi r squared for the.
For me, rectilinear are the way to go.
Well, that's a good question about that, Grosinger, because I remember when that came before us, and we thought that was pretty cool. And it is a 3-dimensional sign. And so I think in the staff report, Sandra, you weren't here, but I think in the staff report, it was within the calculation of what a sign was allowed for that. And I don't know how it was
yeah,
calculated.
they had a sign program for Piazza Borgia, and
It was a master use
Yeah,
permit sign.
master sign.
Yeah.
And it fit within the general confines of the signs for each tenant space.
So, I mean, that is something you probably might have to consider in the future as a 3-dimensional sign. And then how do you measure that? because it does have two sides. It has three sides. It's got this standoff, and then it's got these three sides like this.
Yeah, but the text is really only readable. What, one side, or is it?
Unless
readable
it's
from both?
unless it's orbiting.
Is it also moving through time?
It could
There's a
be.
fourth dimension in here.
I
too.
don't know. Anyway.
Okay, let me state a little bit of what I think I understand from this. I like, as much as Euclidean sounds fun, I think rectilinear is the way to go, and it might limit some creativity, but I think that would be my vote. I like the idea of multiple potential rectangles that you could use. Like for Lucy, we're talking about the L and then the rest of the text and then the little text, because I think that does allow some. Something like this, I'd just say, okay, it's a circle, you get a triangle, whatever. I'd still use the kind of rectangles and linear lines for that. I like your idea of monument signs where you have a ratio between the space of the text and the space of the total sign of some sort. The entire monument, sorry. Which I think something like Bardessono probably wouldn't meet your 50-50. I know you just threw it out there. But for example, I don't think that would meet it because the wall is much bigger. But if we were going to call that a monument sign, I know it's not. It's actually a sign attached to a landscape element. So I think I like that kind of ratio so that it keeps the total area of the monument related in some way to the total area of the sign, text of the sign. I think that gets me through most of that section with my opinion.
Please put my initial by next to Rob's on those. In addition to, I mean. Well put. I will only add, I otherwise fully support your 4 proposed new definitions.
The one may need a little,
Tweaking with.
yeah, on number 3, smallest single rectangle.
I see it as, or
Multiple.
the combination of flush attached rectangles on both 1 and 3.
Second, well, first full sentence.
I'm sorry, point 2. In all 3 cases, number 1, 3A, and 3B, yes. Flush attached multiple rectilinear shapes.
You see where I?
Yes, I do.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, 3, I'm calling it 3A, I missed it. Yes,
Okay.
I follow you. Sign content? Or, I'm sorry, anybody else?
Tag in on this one.
Yeah.
I've had
We're
like
gonna switch back
5.
and forth.
Okay.
So,
Sorry.
That's why they
Pardon me?
needed the tequila right for it.
That's
we-
why he made me take it, huh, Jeff?
That's why I took it before I came here.
Did we cover purpose of a wall? Did we need to cover that on that one? We discussed it briefly.
I don't know.
Okay.
good, we can get off that unless you have anything to share.
Can I recap that we're looking at the idea of a distinct, that, wherever my notes are.
Where it has an independent purpose other than just
Yeah,
as a sign.
clearly discernible purpose and multiple rectangles in a ratio. We'll suggest something of total sign to total copy.
That's okay.
Pretty solid.
Okay, the next item is sign content, and the sign ordinance generally limits commercial signs to the name of the business, but allows extra advertising for goods and services if necessary to identify the business. And looking through the ordinance just moments before this meeting, I realized that allowance for goods and services really only applies to master development plan properties rather than all signs, and yet they've been applied well, maybe not in all cases. I'm thinking of Summerston. We have wine, art, and ranching or something to that effect to identify what Summerston is. People don't know the name Summerston means all those different things. We have another property in town that would like to put up awnings on their windows and identify coffee, beer, and some other item that I forget. And is that necessary in addition to their signs? It's hard for staff to advise applicants because of this qualification, if necessary. Well, when is it ever really necessary? But it can be really beneficial and helpful to know what the business is all about. So we've been what? We've been looking at it on a case-by-case basis. It's part of the signs that come before you, and they get approved in that manner without having it be more specific in the code. And do you think we need to spell it out at all?
Buzzer?
I'll go first, and I'll let
Okay.
you follow up. I agree. I don't think we should limit. Well, just like, for example, this, I suggested restaurant, and what we're talking about here is saying is that if necessary. I don't think we should limit that.
Okay. I'll just point out that it does go towards your total sign allotment if you have these extra words. So
Right. Well, that
Redwood, because they wanted pizzeria, means they have less for Redwood.
Which I
It's
think
good.
that's just their choice.
Okay.
beer, wine, soda, and tacos, each one of those is going to be part of the sign. So you may not actually have your own identification of your business because you've got all these other things taking up your sign allotment. But
Well, those are things they sell. Those really aren't.
it's a sign. I mean, it's an advertisement.
Yeah,
And
fundamentally, they're
advertising,
allowed an identification sign, and if it's a name and it needs assistance in what the nature of the business is. But if you start listing hot dogs and, everything, that's getting away. I think that's exactly what we're onto here of what's proper.
Yeah. But it's what we're saying is proper. It's not, there's no kind of line item that says you can't identify hot dogs and tacos.
Well, maybe the suggestion is we not do that.
advertising signs are not, fall within the class of prohibited signs, and if you look how that's defined, it's a sign that advertises products or services other than the identification of the business itself.
Well, that's clearly an advertisement then.
Except that they're allowed for the case of master development or master sign plan properties. So at Summerston, where there's more than one business, they can do it. Up at Washington Square, say if Kelly's wanted to put beer and want coffee,
Well, why
it
wouldn't
puts
you?
them into a different category than standalone businesses on a single parcel.
But why wouldn't you apply the same standards to master development as you would for the sign standards throughout the town? Because essentially
Because
you want
advertising signs are
uniformity.
prohibited.
What's that?
Because advertising signs are prohibited, so that's something we want to discuss if you want to
Well,
open
I'm
it up
saying
to
that why should they be allowed to do something that other people throughout the town can't do? And you're looking for uniformity in the
You can't-
application of your sign.
You can't build a single-family dwelling on a commercial piece of property. That's why. Master development plan, different set of standards as you do in just a typical Old Town commercial. That's why.
Well, I still would think you'd want to apply some standards across the board throughout the town.
That I agree with.
And so that would be a reason to do that for master development or general signage.
I agree with that, and I would, I think, pick up on what both you said. I don't want to be in the business of deciding what's necessary for a business. I don't want to end up, streets are renamed Lucky Center Drive, right? And more power to them for doing that, good for them, as silly as it is. I would rather see a larger total amount of signage allowed, get rid of the directional and identification exemptions. The only thing I would exempt are address numbers. And say, you business, it's up to you to decide. Here's how much you get, whether it's based on total wall area, total street frontage or whatnot. You get this much, do with it what you will. There will still be a discretionary review to make sure it's not obscene, etc. And if you want to name your business Sammy's Cheap Hot Dogs, how is that not an advertisement? Right, again, exaggeration for effect, as opposed to, a name that, right? So let's make it simple. You get X number of signage, use it how you want. The only thing that's exempt are address numbers as required by the fire department. That's my vote.
I don't know, I like directional signs. I think case in point is ad hoc, that never came before us, but the fact that they wanted to have a directional sign pointing to the back where the takeout place was.
Well, I don't think Jason's saying that they couldn't. It'd just be their choice if they wanted to. And there wouldn't be these carve-outs of different ones. Like, well, if it's directional
Well, I
sign,
mean,
it doesn't count. If
you-
it's this, it
directional
does
signs
count.
are exempt from that, right? So what you're saying is that it would be included in the total sign
I'll
calculation.
bump the total up a little
Up
bit.
the total.
In the case of
What's a
ad hoc-
good number? I don't know how you do that. I mean,
the
it's
case of ad
something,
hoc, it's-
because you're asking us to give you ideas, and so it's something to look at as a possibility.
Well, one of the things Steve Rogers has observed is the Washington Square sign, for example. Washington Square, and it's always through the eyes of a first-time visitor to Yountville. What's Washington Square? Is it offices? Is it? And he thought it would be, and I agree that some specialty shops or shops, restaurants, something underneath generic categories, not we have hot dogs or we have, an item, but just identifying the nature of activity in that center.
Well, the same's true with V Marketplace, too.
Exactly.
I mean, you have multiple tenants, you would like to give some identification to each one of them.
But I think it's got to be in a very macro specialty retail, or you can't name every kind of wedding dresses, and everything that goes on in there. It would get a little out of hand.
Although interestingly, isn't it true now, although we've made several exceptions at Vintage 1870, that the identification sign exemption for multi-tenant buildings says that everybody's supposed to be on there, right? Did
For
that-
the directory and the master
Right?
development
So
and master sign program.
I think we've already kind of tied ourselves in the knot saying we're going to exempt this, but only if you do this, right? We're going to exempt the master roster of, which has sort of the information you're talking about, but you have to list everybody in a multi-tenant building, except we recognize there are 50 tenants and a sign capable of having all 50 tenants. This came up with Napa style, in that the strict reading of the ordinance would have said that, well, you can't be on there unless every tenant in that development is on there. And to me, that speaks to my point of we're boiling the ocean here with so many exemptions on top of these narrow restrictions. I'd rather say to property owners, this is what you get. You do with it what you want. And if Rob's business wants to pay more for more prominent signage than Jason is willing to pay, go to town. And you guys sort it out and not get in the business of telling them what's necessary. We're boiling the ocean. There's so much information coming up here. I think it's, in my view, obscuring the goal, which is to have the signs not be too ostentatious and too numerous. And that's really what we're after, right? And making it so people leave their money behind.
So
And let's let the people whose livelihoods depend on that business decide how best they want to sign their businesses.
So maintaining some limit of the maximum size of the sign.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the one concern I wouldn't want is somebody to say, I'm going to take all of that X number of square footage and put it into one big sign and not have any of these directional signs.
I would leave that up to the business owner, if
So
myself.
then, how do you feel about A-frame signs? Those portable signs are not allowed, but we have a lot of
Only if there's
businesses
an
that want
appropriately dressed person carrying it about.
We still have open signs.
That
before we get to
exemption,
A-frame signs.
I'm in favor of.
I'm sorry, repeat.
Maybe if it,
He wants a sandwich board, not an A-frame.
Yeah, he wants someone to wear it as a dress. A-frames,
no.
I think they're sort of a hazard on the sidewalks because people will want to put them in a
Yeah.
prominent place, and then it becomes, a liability for the town.
Before we explore A-frames thoroughly, maybe, did we get any consensus on,
Yeah, maybe we go back to trying to break it down, because Jason threw us off by just throwing everything into one bucket.
We boiled the ocean.
So now we've got boiled fish. Excellent.
I never heard that before. That's good.
Is everybody in agreement that these signs are essentially identification signs and that advertisement signs are consistent with the way the ordinance is now, are not allowed? And you're leaving it up to the applicant to conceivably not even have their name on there. They have stuff they sell.
Yes.
And I actually, I don't know if we can add in there that that whatever this extra stuff, like let's say Chichio restaurant, the restaurant piece, only be subordinate to the name. Is there any way we can do that? So that it's not big, bold,
All right.
hot dogs, blah, 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 and underneath Jimmy's hot dog stand. But the Jimmy's hot dog stand has to be the big thing, and then subordinate to that, smaller than that, could be the other option.
We can do that.
So that would be
Going
my,
back to exactly what you were saying not to do.
That is my opinion. There was recently a restaurant in Marin that's being sued, and I think they've actually lost a judgment because the name of their restaurant is considered too similar to the name of another restaurant. And they said, but
Coppola. It's Coppola.
yeah, they said, wait, this is just an Italian word for, and I forget what it was, neighborhood kitchen. This is a generic word. And to me, that strikes to the heart of, we're trying to parse it too finely. Is this informational? Is it advertisement? I know, Potter Stewart said he can recognize it when he sees it. But, so.
how does that relate to having
Because
the name be
restaurant,
bigger than?
what if the name were Ristorante?
Well, then that's the name, so it could be big.
But Ristorante is also a perfectly serviceable word, and in our neck of the woods, it's recognized as the nature of the business. So should it be subordinate in that case?
No, because the name. I'm saying if your name is, if your actual legal name is Jimmy's Hot Dogs and Milkshakes, and you want to put under there, well, we also have tacos, pizzas, beer, and wine, that what would have to be bigger is the name, which includes some descriptions, which is Jimmy's Hot Dogs and Milkshakes, and the rest of the things would just have to be a smaller text.
Isn't that?
I understand.
That's
I
realize
disagree.
quite a liberalization of what we have now.
Yeah,
Yes.
because you're not supposed to, because
Not supposed to have that.
that's advertising.
That's right.
Well,
And I get that, and I understand what you said. I don't share the view, but I understand it. And to your point, Bob, I care that the signs are tastefully designed and they're not neon and really illuminated. I'm not real worked up that somebody's going to put. I'm not too concerned with what they say. Leave it up to the business owner. If it's not working, I'm okay with it. My view. So I should stop repeating it.
So can I get a straw vote of who likes
Got one
it the
and
way
one.
it is now?
What house the rest fall?
Who wants to just leave it alone and sort of,
Move on.
or who wants to allow some description that's subordinate to the main name, and,
Well, I've already said,
or throw it wide open would be the third.
well, my feeling is that I think what we do right now works, and it's not broken in my mind, and we, in general, don't have objections from applicants. And so it's not broken. So why try to fix something that's not broken in my
Yeah.
mind?
I think what the requests tend towards is not people that want to blatantly advertise in their sign. It's more, they want a little more description sometimes of what their products are, or what their business is, not what their products are.
Well, I think descriptives on an awning is an advertisement to me. So, I think.
How should we handle
What
this?
if Redwood would have put pizzeria on an awning? What's the difference between that and a hot dogs?
Well, pizzeria is an establishment. It's not a.
So hot dog
Show dogs.
Pizzeria is like a ristorante.
Yeah, okay. But Show Dogs in San Francisco is a hot dog restaurant, so they could feature hot dogs. I mean,
Well, if that's the
I
name
go
of- if
back
that's the name
because
of
I
the
go back to
business-
I go back to what you were saying with and that's the name of their business. But I go back to what you were saying earlier. It's not broke. I've yet to see on my short amount of time a huge issue beyond the architectural signs at Bardessono. Any major issues with signage coming before us, and it sounds like well before I was even participating as well. So I mean, I agree with you, Rob, completely.
There's a vote of 2.
All right, well,
It's 2 and 1 and 1, so are we just going to split between
2,
5
1,
different?
1, 1.
What do we get if we don't get a majority?
okay, no, that's,
Gerrymander
we'll
this guy.
take all comments and sort it out.
So maybe
I'm happy with the status quo. I think it seems to be working, and I understand the comments, but
here we go.
Okay, we can maybe move on to the next one,
yes.
which is open signs. This should be, I shouldn't say that, short.
Now, Bob, that was the triumph of hope over experience, but thank you.
I'll budget 10 minutes.
How are we doing on our time? There's a lot of pages here.
Open signs. Here's the story on open signs in a nutshell. And it gets into kind of another area of sign that is not allowed are portable signs. And when I arrived on the scene 10 plus years ago here, and was trying to make sense of what's going on in this town, a couple of businesses, there was maybe 2, 3 at the most, had on a little pole on a stand, oval sign about that big, open, set by the front door. And I'm looking at those, and they've been doing it a while apparently, and I reasoned that in the ordinance you're allowed an open sign, and the rules are what can exceed 1 square feet, and you can have 4 square feet per business of them. And normally they hang in the window of the door, front door or whatever, near the front door. So the reasoning was, what's the diff of this thing hanging in a window or sitting by the door? So kind of left it alone. That's the way it was. That was the interpretation. And then it got to be a little more and a little more and a little more to where now names were going on the sign. And they were not staying by the front door. They were moving out towards the sidewalk. And that became a problem. It's almost like a little snare by the sidewalk to get people into the business, and more prominent and less inconspicuous as they used to be. So the thing of it is, it's not really addressed in the ordinance other than being prohibited as a portable sign. You can't have portable signs. So because it's not addressed, and it's been a practice that's gone on some time, we either need to go, well, we don't have to do anything other, I mean, I can chase them still, but it would be at this opportunity of amending the sign ordinance nice to either legitimize them, outlaw them, accommodate them in some way, and write some rules into the ordinance of how they may be allowed, if they're going to be allowed.
Open signs.
Open signs.
Who else besides RAS are using them?
Hope and Grace, and then they got a little crazy
Jessup
down at
was.
Jessup. They had a couple of them that were like, they were like this, open on a stand, and there were 2 of them, and they were out by the sidewalk, and the thing of it is, it becomes a deal where when one sees one business,
Yeah, that's
they,
the idea.
that looks good, I'll try that. And,
So this is like freestanding is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The current question before us is not portable signs, which are currently prohibited.
well, that's the thing too, because I'm going to get into menu, or we will get into menu signs at some point on this, which became another form of a portable sign, in the sense they were on some of them on a stand and held a menu board. And is that okay? And I think we can maybe think about not
Getting a new
feel
pair of glasses.
inhibited to not blow up the ordinance in a certain sense and look at changing some of this and making portable signs okay in some cases.
How many fingers?
That was really rude.
For me, it's the name. I don't think they should have names on them.
Just say open.
Yeah. And then I think that somewhat ties it to the property more, too. An internal business at Vintage putting a sign out front that says, I don't know all the shops in there, their names, but Blue Heron Gallery open outside. It's different. Now it's becoming a kind of a marketing thing. And same with you take the caboose and you put one way out by the street or by the sidewalk. And if it's just an open sign, then it obviously has to be closer to the business so people know which business it's associated with. So that's my opinion as far as what the content of an open sign should be.
I'll observe that they generally work fine as long as they are of modest size and number and stay by the door or near the entry and don't start getting away from there. It becomes a problem. And whatever copy you want to prohibit on them or restrict them to, that's another thing. That's fine. They probably don't need to say more than open if they're by the door. That means that door is open.
Right.
So why don't you just restrict the distance from the door?
We can do whatever we want. We're asking, can we do this? What do you?
Well, that makes sense to me, and I don't think you should say you take Visa, MasterCard, American Express.
Right.
You shouldn't even put in your name. If it's by the door, it's obvious that it's that business. It has to be related to the door to show you that that business is open, and that's where you go.
Yep.
So I think, like Rob said, open, 12 inches, whatever the size you've defined here. And it has to be within a certain range of the front door. That would work for me. That takes care of the thing out on the sidewalk, and you're trying to figure out who's open, like the coffee caboose. I mean, I've never seen their sign, but if there's a proximity to the door, it's clear that that door is open for that business.
How about those businesses located on an interior courtyard, like at Piazza Quercia, where gallery open is often used, right at the mouth of the
Or the
entryway?
Miss Dixie's, she puts all kinds of signs out there about her business.
She used to. She doesn't
The-
anymore.
So does
Sign
the
police got
wayfinding
her?
sign, does the new wayfinding program replace,
It will-
justify not allowing those?
No, there's not been an associated discussion with that. It'll give you the direction to that business, but they'll still, open is a big deal for some businesses. Even if they got the door open, they want an open.
Yeah.
Well, we say that because really what we're getting into, though, is also Miss Dixie's was an A-frame. The chalkboard in front of, besides the open sign, the coffee caboose also has a chalkboard with coffee details on it. So it's, we're talking about several things at the same time.
Yeah, we're going to get into that next.
But the other, because both Miss Dixie and Gordon's gallery, Gordon's brings his sign out there to let people know that he's open, because people don't even know he's back there.
The easel. The easel with the,
Yeah, right, exactly, but it's clearly a different kind of sign. Could be a menu too, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, where do you start to define the limits of that? I
Well-
don't know how those master development properties can identify multiple tenants that are open there. I don't know. I mean, that's another discussion, I think.
and maybe it's I've had, believe me, over the years, numerous meetings with those businesses down the breezeway. Not Miss Dixie, she's too new, but with Gordon's, and there was another business back there. And it had to do with, there's an archway at the breezeway, and the solution was additional signs over there identifying the businesses down the breezeway. Well, whoever was not interested didn't want to pay for them. Whoever was going to have to pay for them, that didn't happen. and they didn't get installed, they didn't even get applied for. So I thought we came up with a reasonable solution, and it could have been to where, because they're recessed and remote from the street, it could have had a identification sign and maybe a little hanger that says open that they can remove and put up when they're open. Right. If that's important. But that didn't happen, so we still get the easel and occasionally a Miss Dixie sign, although that hasn't happened in a while.
I'm going to combine my recommendations for open signs and A-frame signs and portable signs all into one. They're all signs.
They're all the same thing.
It's a sign, it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck. It's a duck. Increase the total amount of signage allowed, leave it up to the individual business to decide whether it's more important to have open or larger identification letters, right? I would,
Well, there's one problem with that.
Just one?
Well, the main one that I see is that it frequently can be done from a standpoint of just sign area that they have available to them. It's a question of should it be done?
well, I don't have any objection to someone saying they would like an open sign. I would object if it's illuminated and visible from the street and is flashing, but if someone would like to have their business name be smaller to allow space to say open, I don't see how that could be objectionable, just the word open. I suppose if someone said, I just want my sign to say open,
Name your business then.
name your business open. So that is my view. It's all signage, increase the total amount of signage, allow the businesses to determine what mix of information they'd wish to provide. I would go so far as to say that every commercial parcel be allowed one portable sign, whether it's these little posts that say open or an A-frame. And I would be willing to consider even something like, it's a minimum of one per commercial parcel, but for every, and I'll make up a number here, 75 feet of street frontage, another one could be issued. So I'm thinking of properties that have really long street frontages, and they might get two portable signs, and whether it's a little stand that says open or an A-frame that's not blocking the sidewalk, I let the businesses decide.
So are A-frames are currently illegal?
They're not allowed.
So
Although
did
some-
Bouchon Bakery, Masonry, Summerston, and Kelly's Fuel file for an exemption to that illegality?
Enforced all of
No,
those.
they just stuck them out, and we told them they couldn't put them there. Although we only told them they couldn't because they were on the street and visible. We've sort of interpreted ones that aren't really obvious and visible from the street as exempt as courtyard signs, and Coffee Caboose falls into that category. The second one, or the other one at Bouchon that's at the exit door that faces the courtyard, we've
It says entrance only?
interpreted
Or
that,
exit only?
interpreted that as a courtyard sign. So we're always applying these interpretations where they're otherwise prohibited.
We could have interpreted that
And that's why you see
one.
some and you don't see others.
Could interpret that one as a directional sign, exit only. Those are exempt.
So going
And it
back,
gets crazy.
But they won't be.
yeah, going back to
Under
Jason.
my scenario,
Yeah.
you get this many square feet.
That's
by
why.
whatever
So then these
metric
people who have, exactly.
you
It's more
decide how to
consistent.
use your signage.
But
Exactly.
I guess I'm suggesting in some cases, some businesses have so much just by their frontage sign area allowed to them, they could have all of that going on, and then that's good. And that's why I say,
Then,
maybe in some cases it can be done, but should it be done?
well, I would go.
They
so
don't
far
have
as
to-
say the only
they don't
solution
have to
that
reduce
problem
their
is
sign-
Every parcel in town must be of the same size, with the same street frontage, so that everybody gets to work from the same baseline. Cool. Right, and some people are going to pay more for a corner lot or greater street frontage and less to be in the back of a property. And, your point, I think, Bob, it's true. There's going to be differences, but that's endemic to the whole scenario.
And so your example is, yeah, somebody could have an open sign and a,
Could have all of them.
well, actually, what you suggested was just one portable sign per.
Yes. per commercial parcel, but I would make an exception where, and I don't know what that number is, whether it's 75 linear feet or 100 linear feet of street frontage. You know, if you have a parcel and it's got 10 linear feet of street frontage, yes, you have a commercial parcel, you get one freestanding sign. If you have 1,000 feet, we're not going to limit that property to just one. The idea is, let's not have a proliferation, a little forest of freestanding signs, but every so often, one is okay, great.
So you've grouped freestanding signs, A-frames, little,
Open,
kinda-
directional, identification, everything
And use
except,
signs.
everything except address numbers.
any kind
Because
of a
those
sign
have
that's
to
not
be on the
attached to a building would be what you're talking about then.
It sounds like you're even including all signs.
No,
All
you're
signs.
including, he's
Yeah,
including everything.
all signs.
Everything except address numbers, because those must be on the building. That's not a choice.
I think I like this kind of all-inclusive piece. Okay, that was not a fully formulated thought. Give me a second.
No, stick with the agreement.
Oh, I see so many kind of negotiations going on about this whole thing, about all these different, if you just get this basket and you're allowed to do all these various things with it, and then you're kind of negotiating back and forth with you, your life will be a disaster, I think. Maybe. It could be chaotic. I think it could be chaotic.
Well, we are suggesting that some of these be approved at an administrative level, while identification signs come before the board here.
Yeah, but I mean,
and
what
Highway
Jason's
29
saying,
mural.
you know, this-
But then there's a combination of where they've put together their sign package to get approval from you, and they later come back to staff, and it's not, they never think of everything at once. So it's not going to be well thought out.
I don't like A-frames because I think the footprint is so large. You know, they have to put them, they're either putting them in the landscape or they're putting them on the sidewalk, and it's, you know, in general, I don't like them. I think open signs are almost, I mean, it's an auxiliary sign. It's like a directional sign to me. As long as it's within a certain distance of the front door and it's portable if it has to be, you know, and it just says open, and when it's closed, it's gone. From my standpoint, it supports the business. It's not a business sign. It's a wayfinding sign, like a directional sign. So I would allow them within the parameter of a size, the graphic open, like Rob said, and the distance from the door. And then, and also this, maybe the size of the base or something, you know, so that essentially this thing isn't a big cylinder that's 3 feet wide, you know, that the footprint that it has as this is sitting there, that there is some limitation on that.
Those are along the lines of how we've been attempting to enforce them.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
in my mind, those would be the things that would be important to me about open signs. A-frames I don't like, so I wouldn't allow them.
And it's interesting to me that we've made A-frames illegal, but we allowed Bouchon, because it's off, which I understand, but something that simply could have been painted on the door.
I think at
And
some
wasn't
point-
that, excuse me, pardon me, one other thought real quick, because it's not often I get in between these three. But one other quick thought is, I mean, the main reason they redid that whole design was through, you know, customer flow through there, so they knew they wanted that door to be exit only. So that's just a thought as to, if we're going to make A-frames illegal, but in some cases they're acceptable, maybe we take the next step and say, maybe it'd be better to paint the sign on the door.
I would offer that they started with the reopening of the bakery. They felt the need to have something out to announce that. And so they ended up with this chalkboard A-frame. And now we told them, can't use it that way, so they don't know how to use it, so they're using it as an exit sign, and it'll probably eventually go to something
No,
different.
they had two. They had one at the
Well,
exit when they had the one at the
but
front.
two of them, they don't know what to do.
And when they
Yeah.
were done announcing the reopening, they started listing all the different macaroons.
Right, yeah.
So then it becomes advertising
Yeah.
for.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, that would seem clear to me, though.
How about I pose a question to the board here? On a very limited scale, this is aside from square footage, how do we feel about A-frames? Yay or nay? Because we hear a no.
Yeah.
If they're illegal, they're illegal. There shouldn't be an exception because it's, I still don't.
But we get to create the law.
Yes, that's what I mean. So, and then my point with the coffee caboose is, I understand it's allowed out on the walkway because they're back off the street.
It's another interpretation that we're always forced to make,
Yeah.
like the signs that are not readily, and that's the word I made up, readily, visible from the public way, I think is the way it's stated. And then it becomes, well, what's not visible? Are they talking from a car driving by, or you walk up to it, or at the sidewalk? And it becomes this interpretation of, well, how far off into the horizon do you have to put this thing, or around a corner or whatever, to where that applies? And we try to use some practical interpretation that if it's not right out at the street, and or you can read it from the public right away, it's, you can probably see the sign, but you can't read it unless you go onto the property. And it's, I grant you, it's an interpretation.
Oh, no, I understand.
So am I correct that 3 of you are opposed to A-frames? Jason, you're okay with them? And I'm not sure, Bob, how you stand on them.
Yeah, I'm not keen on them, but I accept them under the guise of it all counts towards maximum signage. I don't want to parse out the, yes, A-frames are allowed never more than a maximum of 5 square feet, along with all the other signage. I accept them only under the kind of master, you get this much signage. So I want to make that distinction.
And he brings,
Only in that case.
and he brings up a very good point because Coffee Caboose, which I love, I go there all the time, I'm not banging on it, also has an open sign down there, you know, so, which is quite a bit of ways from the door because it's off and you got to walk up the walkway. So if we have a better allowance to let them determine what works best, I don't know. It comes back the other way, but still, it makes sense what he's saying.
You really think so,
I'm
Jeff?
afraid so.
Bless your
Because
heart.
we've got so many interpretations here. We've got so many interpretations, so it comes back to that as well, so.
Simplifying it.
I was just going to say, I'm opposed to them as well, but how many exceptions have we made already? We're talking 2 or 3 here already, and then you got a few that aren't approved. and-
Well, if we allow them, every business down Washington Street's going to want an A-frame.
Yes, you bet.
Yeah.
The other thing about having
Mind what we've
this
done.
kind of like bucket of signage potential, and you include the A-frame with that, is, you know, how are you doing this calculation? The A-frame goes in, it goes out, it goes in, it goes out. You have fixed signs on the wall. Next time the A-frame comes out, maybe the A-frame's bigger than it was before. You know, it's a portable sign. So, you know, if you throw that into the mix, you have to do the sign police to go out and measure it, make sure it's all the same. I think it's just, it could be a can of worms.
And then we'd have to say, if it's a chalkboard, we're measuring the whole thing, not just the text, because then it changes.
Because the text changes every day.
And what about when Arts in April happens and Summerston has put their Arts in April A-frame out on the grass out front to promote it?
That's a nonprofit that gets treated a little differently.
Okay.
So it's a temporary sign.
Benefit.
For that short amount of time, okay, very good.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
After 8 p.m., no refund, sir.
It's not a public hearing, but the public may have.
I'm just, no, it's nice to have somebody who expresses an interest. I'm just warning the fellow that
He even sat forward in his chair, Jason.
after 8 p.m., you're committed.
But are we?
Solicit input?
No.
We should be. Sort of like the chicken and the pig had a conversation about breakfast.
Okay, what's next?
Input from the public?
Can we jump ahead to menu signs?
Yes.
For the reason that they Yeah, on a couple of occasions are portable signs as well, and to me, it's another creativity thing, rather than they're trying to do something to skirt the ordinance. And again, this is another when I got here story. I was a little surprised at the extent and length of the ordinance, the sign ordinance section that addressed menu signs. I really wondered what was going on with menu signs here, that they felt the need to be so detailed. And I almost, having been here the length of time I have been, and appreciate the community for what it is, it's lots of restaurants, and you're going to have menu signs. And it's just a natural thing that assists the restaurant, assists the visitors, and it's expected. You walk up to a restaurant, and it's helpful to have a menu sign. And I didn't understand why they were really so detailed in how they wanted to review menu signs. And I think it ought to go, my opinion is that it probably ought to go the other way and be one of the more permissive types of signs we have in town for the use, appropriate to the use. And it gets into the portable sign a little bit. There's a couple, Hurley's, they wanted their menu on a slanted board encased in a brass frame on a brass stand near their front door. And I think it's still there. They were approved, that sign.
A question, Bob. Help me understand how we draw a distinction between a menu sign and an advertising sign. Is a menu sign special just because it lists the food and price at table service, and if I want to sell model trains, it becomes an advertising sign?
I think it's a different consideration, in that people, they shop restaurants frequently. If you're in a town that's new to you, you walk around, type of food, price of food. You want to know before you walk in and commit to, you're not buying a train, you're a model train or whatever your example was. You're buying a dining experience that you're investing a couple hours in maybe, and don't know that you want to be there. So it's helpful information.
I agree it's helpful information. I dislike the discrimination between business types. I think it's a sign. And if the restaurant is the best, if they feel the best use of their allowed sign area is to list what they sell, good for them. That's for them to decide. And if the next business, but why somebody selling books or coffee or lodging isn't extended the same courtesy, I think we're interfering too much in the marketplace. It's a sign.
Well, there again, I think for what they typically are in size, it's not going to be a problem of restricting them. They're going to have that capacity to have them.
Great.
I guess the question is, do you want us to tone down the amount of review that's indicated by the present ordinance, and do you want to allow a wider range of possibilities for how the signs are displayed rather than stuck to the side of a wall?
I do, because if a menu sign is a sign, in my favorite approach, it simply gets added to the total displayed sign area if it's visible from the public right away. Red's menu sign I would not count as a sign. Their menu board.
They don't have one. Nor does Redwood. Nor does Bouchon.
Red does not have one adjacent to the door? Mm-mm. Must have been good tequila then.
So Ad Hoc does. Hurley's does. Even Pacific Blues doesn't.
I think Bistro Gentil has a portable.
Bistro has a portable. Bottega has one attached to the wall. I think we hit them all, didn't we? And the
think,
deli doesn't.
Pretty solid.
Does Lucy have one?
Lucy has one out behind
They
the
do,
rammed
actually.
earth architectural element
They
that
do, on the
says
walk-
Bar
the
de
walk-
Sono.
On the walkway going in, they do.
And they only added that well after they
Yes.
were open and running.
Well, nevertheless,
No, and I
my
know
position
what your
is,
point
if it's
is.
a sign
Exactly,
that
I
you can
agree.
see from the
But
street.
the thing of it is,
Green.
that goes to my point. What problem were they, a lot of them don't even have them, and what problem were they solving with all these detailed regulations where
No.
we have half a dozen in town maybe? And
Well, I guess you think of, go back to like, since I just did a trip across Millinoya where with big saloon signs that would be all of the items up
Right,
above, and you
right.
could have them up above the door and have because I was looking at 8 square feet. I'm like, it's a good size menu. And my bet is it harkens back to what this town was several years ago. And that's where all those limitations come up. So I like the idea of toning it down. It's usually a square foot, 2 square feet, maybe.
Well, let me ask you this. So are you suggesting that you limit it, instead of 30 inches by whatever it is, to limit it to a much smaller size? Or do you say that's the largest you can do, and then leave it open for people?
I think
guess
the
I'm-
condition is, and forgive me, currently, it doesn't matter where the menu sign is located, it's got this very detailed set of restrictions. If it's in an inner courtyard, right, am I right? And it's a menu sign, there's a detailed
Right.
set of restrictions. Whereas if you walk, we don't look at signs inside Vintage 1870 for names of business, right? They can't be seen. But
Well, yeah, and I was just taking off on that, those comments, that I think what we're asking is that if, with your consent, we would draft up some more abbreviated restrictions and a little more latitude on how they can be displayed. And
Well, I actually am 100% behind what you're attempting to do, because it is an advertisement on one hand, if you look at it very strictly, but from a traditional standpoint, and dining goes way, way back, that a menu has traditionally been posted by the door of restaurants. I mean, in Europe, in Italy, every restaurant has a menu pretty much posted at the street, and you get a sense of what that restaurant's about, what the prices are about. I think that's really important, because I don't want to walk in, well, if I don't see a menu, then I'll go ahead and ask to see a menu before I sit down, usually. And people are very nice about doing that. But I think it's a real help to be able to see a menu that's posted in some way on the exterior. So I think it's a great idea. I don't know how you define the size of it. I mean, certainly this size that we have here obviously has worked in the past. But we're just saying, let people go ahead and post their signs, their menu on a daily basis, however they want to do it. So, it is an advertisement, and it's a tradition in restaurants and dining that they have these. So I'd say, okay.
Okay?
Were you saying, is that what you were saying, however they want to do it?
Well, within some bounds. If they start pushing a portable out by the sidewalk, that's not what we're going
Yeah,
for
and maybe
here.
you define it like an open sign in the sense it has some proximity to the
Exactly,
entrance of the
yeah.
restaurant.
And it's just the size of the menu itself?
Yeah, we're probably not going, the size isn't so much, it's that it's kind of
The position.
prescriptive now, it's got to be on the building, and
That's good. Very good.
Do you mind if we invite the public if there is any input, or do you want to wait till the end?
No, I think you're quite right to
Okay.
point out that we should have done that. Sir, would you care to speak to us and offer your opinions? I should have been asked earlier, and I apologize. I thank Mr. Winterberg for reminding me. Hello.
I'm Craig Camp from Cornerstone Cellars.
Hey.
And I find the sign ordinance here more than adequate, to tell you the truth. In fact, I think it's appropriately restraining. You mentioned the A-frame signs. There's a tendency, they put one up, I better put one up. So
Yeah.
I think that's something you should consider moving forward. If everybody else starts putting them up, I'll put one up too. And I don't think it necessarily adds to the to your business. I think it's some of the things we do just trying to push that extra step when it actually doesn't provide you any more business. But I think it's a good thing to limit the amount of signage in town and keep a restrained, elegant environment community. And I just came because I was interested to hear what the discussion was.
Do you have an open sign at Cornerstone, or is it?
Yes. It's
Revolve?
funny. For me, we have an open and a closed sign, and the closed sign is almost more important because we're trying to stop people from coming in to start a tasting too late in the day. So we'll put that out, about 20 minutes before closing, just so we can get a proper flow and close at the proper time. But I think a basic open sign is kind of a normal thing for a business to have, and a welcome. It's almost welcoming. It's a good idea to have that.
How do you feel about the size definition of open, and closed is a longer word, so it's going to be smaller?
Right. No, I think, you want it to be understated. You don't need to have a blaring sign. You just want, if someone is close enough to your door, you want it to be large enough so they can see it, not necessarily a block away or down the street. I think it has to have a reasonable size, just open, simple enough.
What style do you have for yours? I know Page Cellars, oftentimes, they have one on a stand, don't they?
Yeah, we just have, it's a, I don't know the exact size, it's about this big. It says open.
It's a hanging sign.
Yeah, it just hangs on the overhang there when you come in the porch.
'Cause I've seen the
Somerston
Page
has
Cellars
that too
ones.
on their, right next to their door. It's just a
Page is a
sign.
window sign. Page is a window sign, not a freestanding
Right.
one.
They just have
Somebody has a
printed
freestanding
one
sign
inside. We
on
had
the
one in the
patio.
past, but we got
Okay.
rid of it.
There you go. That's it, too.
Yeah, it didn't really work. I mean, it wasn't, also, I was told it was the wrong thing to have. I put it up because some other people had one, so I was following the fashion, but it's not I didn't think it's very useful business-wise.
So maybe since you're the one kind of business member of the public here, we're asking you a lot of questions, but I throw out there, what do you think about kind of the laissez-faire attitude of Jason James of throwing everything into one pot and you make the decision as a business owner or a business manager?
Well, I think that again, I like the idea of letting, obviously, the business owner make as many decisions as possible, but I think you'll run into a situation where, again, kind of pointed towards the freestanding signs, that there could be a great proliferation of them because you feel a pressure. My neighbor put one up, and he's going to get the customer in, so I better put one up too. So I think that those freestanding signs do have a kind of a separate existence category right there.
I also want to share something, because you are suggesting a change in signage at his business, and this goes into what does the business owner think is best. Your sign now is a wall-mounted sign, and it has your name and wine tasting.
Right.
He just wants it to say Cornerstone Cellars second time round, so eliminate some of that descriptive
I think they get the
information.
general idea.
Sellers.
Sellers gives it away.
It's the dead giveaway, and being in Yountville doesn't hurt either, so. So I think, just simplicity, I think, is a good thing. When we first opened, I think I overreacted a little bit. You're trying to really get going, and then you, through experience, you realize that simplicity is maybe a better. So it also, I think, it fits better with the community and the look of the community. That straightforward, simple signs just are more appropriate.
And how is it going?
It's going very well.
Good.
Yeah.
Actually, I commend you for your artist that you had there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was great. That was a great idea, and I think you probably generated a lot of.
We had a lot of interest from that. That was exciting. That which brings up a signage point too, because that was part of the
Arts in April.
The Arts in April Festival, and the Aprils provided a sign that we put up briefly, just for the period of the show. So perhaps there should be exceptions for something like that, because they have to put up the sign because it's part of the tour. People are supposed to, they give them the sign. That's how they go from spot to spot, is to look for the sign.
And
they did that for the film festival too.
Yeah,
Film
right.
festival,
And I think the
OpenSea.
staff supports that. I think Bob said that was the
nonprofit.
case.
Because they provided the sign, and it's part of the program.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for chatting.
Bob, real quick, the menu sign, not to harp on it, because I agree with what you've said. The chalkboard sign that Bistro's hanging up in their window is fine as well. That's allowing them the parameters to do what fits appropriate for their business.
The oysters or, yeah. Kind of don't look at that.
Okay.
But I suppose you
40,
could,
they're within their area under
Okay.
the current
you
code.
could say that it fits the 40 inches
Well, that's
by
it.
30
But
inches.
so, and I was coming back to it also fits the theme of what they are, but that's not to bring up any issues, but
Yeah, I mean, if you subjected it to some strict analysis, and I guess there's a,
I could find a
Probably
section
okay,
where it would be allowed.
okay. Good.
So,
That's
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's
so I'm going to circle back a little bit in that and reiterate, especially with our wayfinding program going in, I'm more supportive of not having a bunch of portable signs.
I agree completely.
So not having A-frames even as an option, regardless of their inclusion in the overall. So that's
Does that apply to open signs too? Should they hang them on the building?
If
but
possible.
I wouldn't have an A-frame open sign.
no, but I support.
But no,
But if it weren't open, it would fall over.
the post sign, the freestanding. If
It
we're
is
talking about
801,
whether we
isn't
want
it?
freestanding signs,
I said
in
freestanding
general.
signs.
Or the portable signs, we're
Yeah.
in and out each day, when you have an option to post it in your window or hang it from your storefront. Is that better?
I think I would go out and say, yeah. I think that there are enough frontages and stuff that I'd say no portable signs.
Do we have a consensus? Can we take a vote on that?
On
For
what's the,
Certainly for the sake of unanimity, I will agree, no A-frame signs. And I think further agree that there's a consensus that any other freestanding or portable sign be limited, at greatest be limited to proximity.
Yeah.
So,
to the front door,
yes.
6 inches away.
Okay, so now that's up for a vote.
need we vote?
Everybody agree?
I just want to know how everyone feels about this. 'cause
I
this
agree
is
with
the
that.
big
I agree
issue.
Agree
with
with
both
that.
those points.
Really?
I agree
A-frames.
with both those.
Yes.
No
Okay.
A-frames.
No A-frames, but the other portables are okay.
Yes.
But
Within-
it has
within
to be in
proximity of the
proximity
business.
to
Close proximity,
the
maybe
entrance
ones
to
that
the
are-
business.
Then you're going to get, what do you do with the caboose? Where's their entrance?
With what?
Maybe you guys will figure that out. The coffee caboose, where's their entrance? What's proximity to their entrance? Is it proximity to the business, which
step.
is over there?
Yeah.
Or is it the walkway up to
The ramp.
deck?
The ramp.
We could attempt to draft some kind of guideline up for that. Right now, it's just strict
Service counter.
interpretation.
Well, you could make a
Their
case for the
entrance is
entrances
the
at
service window.
the ramp, at the ramp.
I think it is. but-
Yeah,
So it would be, so probably proximity would put it up on the deck, not down in the
Yeah.
whole courtyard area.
I was,
Oh, I was,
because they don't have an entrance per se.
I think,
see, I was confused.
Well, they have a sign that says
Sorry.
coffee caboose, so you know
They're
they're
just
not
so
selling
far
hot
off.
dogs.
yeah.
What's interesting to me, and I'll let it go, let's say 8:02, but what's interesting to me is that, which is fine with me because both of them still, Hope and Grayson are Raz. They both still, they have these open signs, but they are right next to the door. They are not obstructing
That's
anything.
appropriate.
They're not, exactly, they are. But what's funny to me is they're both on the street already that have plenty of street frontage and visibility from every single person walking by, whereas Lavender hasn't done it, Yahate hasn't done it, and the other glass place hasn't done. It's just, so whereas with Coffee Caboose, to me, I was confused. Their entrance to me would be the walkway because they're not immediately visible from the street. So,
So does that mean we'd take things like Yahate and those internal courtyard, and they each get an open sign right at the entry to that courtyard?
yeah, and
you
then
end up
it's
with
all jammed up.
6
Yep,
open signs?
exactly. So therein lies the issue right there. You're exactly right.
So they have no street, they have no door that fronts on the street, so
Yeah.
you can't do that.
There's got to be a way around that, but, so yeah.
Signal flares.
I'm done.
Flashing lights, directional signs above the ridge.
Well, I take out of that, it's a practical application in the case of Coffee Caboose, that you don't go in a building, and you really can't tell from the street whether those little windows are open or that they're open for business other than, so it's appropriate maybe to display a sign that is a little remote from the building itself.
They could put the open sign on top of the A-frame and not at least have two things hanging out
Yeah,
there.
good idea.
Something like that, I don't know.
But we already said no A-frames.
Can I make a
Makes
suggestion?
good sense.
Do you need, well, I mean, we could go on another hour with this. And so, I mean, my suggestion is that we continue this at our next meeting, or are there things do you want to get this thing into ordinance right away, or what?
Well, we were going to head for the council with this, but I think we would have the,
Let's come back here.
I know, but I'm thinking we don't want a big meeting at the council either. They're
No.
going to have to take it in parts. So we can take what we've discussed to them and part two later.
Given the
Well, I
amount
was-
of time we've spent, it makes perfect sense to do
Yeah.
it in parts.
So yeah, the answer is, yeah, we can take a
I mean, I
second.
propose we do that, because I think, this is a
Sure.
good discussion, but there's the kind of the wear factor that
I think it would be
for
helpful
another
to
hour.
come back with draft language, so we're actually looking at that rather than
Yeah,
just
so you
this open
kind of heard what
discussion.
we said, and we can give you feedback more specific to
So I
that.
guess we need to know council's feedback, too.
Yeah, and given the discussion, if anyone has an epiphany on what we've already discussed and has an opportunity to bring it up at the next meeting.
Cool. So we're moving along before, yes? Yes. Staff reports? Board reports?
Thank you for coming.
Thanks.
We appreciate your input.
Good luck.
Our next meeting is
June
June,
12th.
so, okay.
Cool.
And I think you'll all be here. We change over in July, isn't it?
It's July, and it's supposed to.
July will be the
Who
first
is
meeting.
who's coming up for reappointment, or
Rod
Or Mr. Winterberg.
am I?
and
I don't believe so.
And Jason.
Mr. James.
Chairmember Janes.
Are you reapplying?
Don't know. Still thinking.
So we have one or two new members. One's definite.
So I have a question, and that
You're
is,
done?
huh?
I'm sorry.
I'll be leaving.
Where?
He's leaving town.
Air Force.
Acres away, baby.
Another flyboys.
Oh, well.
Do you know where?
I won't, trying to go to Europe, but we'll find out.
Will you be a civilian DOD employee?
No, I'll be an Air Force psychologist.
Medical Corps.
Are they commissioning you?
Yep.
The general.
It's a PhD. They gotta,
Yeah,
they gotta give you something, right?
Generals start out as PhDs.
Very cool.
We could go to Ramstein.
Good for you,
They
Rob.
have a lot
Yeah,
of-
Ramstein is one of the options.
Yep.
Southwestern Germany would be awesome.
More with the trauma aspect. More with the trauma aspect. You've studied that a lot, right?
Yeah, that's my specialty.
Well, best wishes. You gonna have a party before you go?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Are we invited?
Tequila and Hurley's.
Awkward. Of course,
It
everybody.
would be traumatic if we won.
No, everybody.
Outstanding. That's pretty exciting, I think.
Yeah, it'll be fun. But so, I won't be reapplying,
He'll probably be in Europe,
hopefully.
so I'm going to go visit him. So my question is, those of us that are, I guess, the second part of our term, it's over next summer. Is that the deal? So in other words, me, I'm not up for,
I think
my
it's-
term doesn't expire this whenever.
Be summer of 13.
Yeah.
And I think the rest of you three are up then. They're on staggered terms. So these two are up, then you three are up, right?
I don't know, because it's every 3 years. Is it just two dates?
I think it is.
Or is it more greatly staggered than that? You know what I
Could
mean?
be.
So
It
that
could
it's
be.
not
Yeah.
3 people.
Yeah, it may be. Although I don't know. The clerk
Actually, it'd
has
be
the
good to know
schedule.
maybe
It's on the
next
website.
Yeah, it is
meeting,
on the
Yeah, it's on the
if you could tell
webpage.
us. Oh, it does say when
It's on our
we're,
webpage,
we
yeah.
expire?
Yeah, it does.
We're termed out.
Term.
Okay.
Careful that you word
I think
expires.
so.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Looking it up right now.
Termed out.
So, do we all agree we're adjourned?
We are adjourned.
Yes.
Agreed.
I vote yes.